Greetings. Excuse me. Good morning, government students, or good afternoon, depending on what hour you happen to be. What you're going to see here is a PowerPoint presentation on interest groups, and that is, of course, the subject that we're in the midst of as we talk about linkage institutions. Interest groups are just one of the ways that you, as a citizen, get connected to government. Linkage. Now, there is a note sheet available to you. I will make sure that you have that available at Moodle. I will have email explanations as to how to manage this thing. Obviously, if the PowerPoint moves a little bit too quick, just scroll back. It's amazing. So, with that being said, I'm out and PowerPoint in. Interest groups. Folks, we just got done studying political parties, and one of the things that is important to realize is that besides parties, we have another large set of linkage institutions that we call interest groups. Thousands of them covering a wide array of basically every issue you can imagine. And these interest groups are working in Washington, D.C. They're working in downtown Grand Rapids. They're working at the state legislature in Lansing. Obviously, there are thousands and thousands of interest groups in Washington, D.C. trying to influence the federal government and the policymakers within the federal government. But at the local level, you'll get hundreds as well. So here we go. What about interest groups? First of all, some interest groups carry a lot more influence than others. And so we talk about power. What makes for a powerful interest group? Well, first of all, it helps to have a broad distribution. You have members from your interest group in all 50 states in the country. And that influence as a result is felt nationwide as opposed to just locally. A second point to keep in mind is cohesiveness. If your interest group has divisions within, obviously that can become problematic. For example, take the American Medical Association. This is an interest group that should be powerful, medical professionals throughout the country. But there are some pretty controversial issues like cloning and fetal tissue research and abortion. These kind of major topics split the medical community, and as a result, their power is somewhat limited by the fact that they are not cohesive. Now, the other extreme would be Mothers Against Drunk Driving. You wouldn't join that organization unless you were against drunk driving and hoping to toughen drunk driving laws. Pretty easy to be cohesive when you have an interest group built on one particular issue. A third one, connections or familiarity. Who do you know? Makes a great deal of difference. Do you have connections to people in power? Do you have a familiarity with how the system works? Those things can be very valuable to an interest group. Number 4, you need to have money that can be used for commercials, pamphlets, getting your message out. If you want to have lobbyists are individuals that are actually hired to do the footwork, the legwork, the front lines talking for an interest group. These lobbyists are individuals wandering around Lansing, Michigan, wandering the Capitol in Washington, D.C., trying to convince legislators and other policymakers to make the quote-unquote right decision. And then finally, numbers. How many people are in your interest group makes a huge difference. If you're 20 people who love butterflies in West Michigan, well, you probably won't carry the influence of, say, the Sierra Club with several 100,000 members throughout the country fighting for various things related to the environment. All right, so there we go. That's how you have power in the policymaking process if you're an interest group. Having one of those things is a start. Having all 5 of those things makes you extremely influential. The videos that you watched prior to these notes on the National Rifle Association Case in point, the NRA is one of those groups that has all five of these things. Cohesiveness right now, not exactly perfect, but the other things there are strong as can be. All right, what about negatives? We talk oftentimes negatively about interest groups, and obviously, because they're fighting for a side of an issue, they are going to often mislead. They are going to often talk about issues with a bias. And as a result of that, you're not always getting a full picture from an interest group. Too much influence. It's another issue. Do the oil companies have more power than Paul Dykema? My guess is yes, they do. And that irks me a little bit. In that, hey, power in numbers, power in money, those things talk loud, especially when compared to an individual citizen like myself. And so there is that concern that maybe they have too much influence. And finally, something to keep in mind as we talk about interest groups, we tend to loathe those groups that talk about issues we don't like, and we love the groups that back the things we do like. That obviously is human nature. Positives of interest groups. Well, some of these are strictly Wilson-esque in the sense that most people don't even think about some of the positives that do come out of interest groups. Now, the first one is obvious. Interest groups do provide a positive channel for public voice. It's another way for us to get to the policymakers. Linkage. The other one, stimulating involvement, absolutely. When the National Rifle Association is concerned about a bill, they let all of their members know it. And otherwise, you might not know that that bill even exists. But for the NRA, helping you to know what's going on. So they do stimulate involvement, especially leading up to elections. They want you to vote the way they want you to vote. Now, this one, this is Wilson-esque. This is something most citizens don't even think about when they talk about interest groups. Interest groups provide key, technical, and very specific information to lawmakers who are working on legislation. It's unbelievable how much legislators have to do in the modern era, and they can't do it all themselves. You can't be an expert on every bill that you're going to vote yay or nay on. And that's where interest groups come in. Do they have a bias? Well, they might, but you're hearing from more than one. And they're going to provide information to you to help you produce a law that's actually something that's feasible. Can that law be implemented? Well, those interest groups are often helping you with the technical aspects of legislation, which is a great thing. You and I would have to pay more tax money if we expected the legislature to come up with that kind of technical detail on their own. They would need far larger staffs. Library of Congress would need far larger staff. And these interest groups, as a result, are actually saving us money by providing this information. Yay. Now, people. Bigfoot? Huh. Looks like Bigfoot. Join interest groups, well, for a variety of reasons. This is not as important as some of the other material we have here, but just to hit the point. First of all, it's a social thing. If you're a member of the NRA, it's probably because you like guns and you get to hang out with other people who love guns. And that's a great thing. Hey, let's hang out. Let's look at our guns. Let's shoot our guns. Let's talk about our guns. Let's protect our guns. It's a social event. Second thing, economic concerns. Maybe you are in the labor class. You're working for a factory. You belong to a union. And you are concerned about, say, wages. And with your group, because you share a common interest, it brings you together. And sometimes with institutional groups like unions, you are often strongly encouraged or sometimes maybe even quote unquote forced to join when you become part of a particular group. Moral causes. Mothers Against Drunk Driving, arguably, is a cause that's standing up against a social concern, a social issue that has become problematic. We want to cut down on drunk driving deaths, and so there's this moral cause. Right to life might be considered a moral cause, trying to protect the unborn. Moral causes bring people together. And then I mentioned unions already, but institutional uh, groups are common, whether it's a labor union, whether it's the American Medical Association, the American Bar Association. There are many groups that exist to protect a certain profession or arena, broad arena that exists in society. Now, what's the number one reason people join interest groups, folks? There's you, and then there's you with 25,000 other people, or preferably 25 million other people if you happen to be somewhat on the elderly side, like myself, and join the American Association of Retired Persons. The larger your group, the more powerful your voice, especially going back in our notes, if you can maintain that cohesiveness that you want. Now, how do interest groups influence elections? Elections come and go every 2 years. Big presidential elections every 4 years. What do? Well, one of the things they can do, depending on the designation of your group, you can spend your own money on your own advertisement. This is what we call in political science independent expenditures. I want to put out a commercial. Sometimes individuals do this, Michael Bloomberg. You can spend your own money to put out your word. That's free speech, folks. And independent expenditures, hey, a nationally televised ad at 8 p.m. is not cheap. And these interest groups can gather up the cash and make it possible to do that. Grab a billboard or two at the same time. Those are independent expenditures. Now, there are some catches here. We'll get to that later. Volunteers. Interest groups volunteer. I know that back in the day when Vern Ehlers was our 3rd District representative here in West Michigan, Right to Life, for example, would help him by providing phone banks. About a week before the election, you'd get a random call at home. Hello, my name is Joseph Smith. I represent Right to Life of West Michigan, and I'd like to remind you to vote next Tuesday for the Right to Life candidate, Vernon Ehlers. Thank you. Click. Now, Vernon Ehlers is not paying for any of that. Right to Life is, because they have an interest in having Vernon Ehlers elected, they will step up and provide those calls to remind voters to get out to the polls. It's a great deal. Advertising, mailings, propaganda, absolutely. They can put that stuff out under the guise independent expenditures. They can do rallies, either within their organizations. It might be a labor union that holds a rally. Might be some other group out there that wants to draw attention to a candidate or an election. And then finally, if you have the correct legal designation, many interest groups are political action committees as well. And the PAC acronym can set aside specific amounts of money for a candidate. They can write a check. And there's, again, a limit there. You can only, PAC is only allowed to give $5,000 to any individual candidate. Now, we're bleeding into the next question here, but what is a PAC? We got that covered. Yes, the concept of a PAC is again, it's IRS legal designation that allows you to do this. You do have to follow rules and laws that go along with being a political action committee, but don't worry about the details there. I always consider PACs, if you want a good way to look at it, as the money arm of a lot of interest groups. Now, PACs can also donate money to parties, $15,000 to whatever party they choose, and sometimes both. Interest groups that want to hit both sides of the aisle are gonna donate to both Democrats and Republicans, and the Democratic and Republican Party. All right, now part of being a PAC means that you are telling the world via public record who your donors are, how much they gave, All of that stuff has to be tracked. Independent expenditures, soft money, we're going to get to that in just a minute. Now, what's a 527? That's kind of, again, it's an IRS code. It's referring to groups that essentially rose up after the end of soft money. And that's one of those weird terms. I would say it's outdated now, although it still gets brought up. Soft money is referring to what used to be unlimited party donations. You could give $1 million to the Republican Party and even request, hey, I would love it if you would give 50,000 of this in support of this candidate down in Alabama or that candidate over there in Washington State. And it was a way to really kind of sidestep around the laws limiting individuals in their contributions. Soft money was ended with a bipartisan Campaign Finance Reform Act of 2002, and that's when we started to see these 527s pop up. A 527 is not a PAC. It's a slightly different organization, but as a result, it has slightly different rules. A 527 can raise money to advance a cause. Now, that cause might be getting the right person into office to protect or help your cause. And they can take these piles of money and they can spend that money to lobby for their cause, but they can't necessarily mention a candidate by name. They can't coordinate with a candidate. And that's what keeps it legal. If they mentioned the candidate they wanted to win in their ad, that would violate the laws surrounding 527s. So, these independent expenditures, these commercials that you will see as we get closer to 2020, are usually pretty nasty. They're mudslinging ads. They're attacking the opponent because they can do that to protect their quote-unquote cause. And at the same time, they're not endorsing a candidate directly, if you understand what I'm saying. Again, it's a loophole that has allowed these 527s to exist. Now, if you've ever heard the term super PAC, a super PAC is not a PAC, really, by law. A super PAC is just another way of defining these 527s that tend to pop up right around election time. And their sole designation of a super PAC is to get somebody elected. And again, it's usually via ads, advertisement of all types that are bashing one side to help give their side an advantage. Oh, politics is so fun. So there you go, replacing soft money. Now, another quirky thing about 527s and super PACs, there's a new term in politics called dark money. And dark money is called dark money because one of the unique things about 527s and super PACs is that they don't necessarily have to tell you where their money is coming from. It's very easy to have piles of money in the banks of these 527s and super PACs and not know where it's coming from. Thus, dark or shadow money. Two terms for the same thing that you may or may not see on the AP board test in May. Dark/shadow money. All right, now, how does that relate to hard money? Well, hard money is traceable. You can find out exactly who gave and how much. That's hard money. Soft money no longer really exists. That's that money through the back door of a political party. And then finally, the darker shadow money. That's the stuff that's really difficult to track back. Now, I mentioned interest groups here. This last slide is simply showing you some of the big dogs. We've got the American Medical Association. You've got AARP, that would be me, old people. League of Women's Voters is a group that tries to get more voter turnout. Sierra Club is obviously environmental. You've probably heard of it. National Educators Association is a teachers union. American Birding Association. They're out there watching birds. I doubt they have a PAC. American Federation of Labor, it's a union. as is the AFL-CIO right next door. You got Mothers Against Drunk Driving, bottom corner. ACLU is fighting for civil liberties. And then finally, the National Rifle Association up at the top right, and hopefully you know a lot about that since you've watched the videos. That concludes our PowerPoint on interest groups. If you have any questions, please email me. We can talk one-on-one that way. And hopefully this helps lay kind of a nice foundation for your reading from Wilson and preps you for the quiz a little bit. Again, any questions, let me know. Otherwise, you see my hand? Wow, this is cool. We'll see you soon. Bye.